work through the breaking down chemical formulas activity that you have in your binders. You're going to want to take out this breaking down chemical formulas mat, and then you're going to have some envelopes with some cards in it. You will have 14 of these longer chemical formula cards, and then you'll have a bunch of these little cards where you have numbers and you have names of elements. So you're going to want to get those all situated before we get started. So if you notice, the little chemical equation cards, the little chemical formula cards have a little number down here. And we're going to go through them starting with number 1. So find number 1. If you need to pause the video to get yourself started, you can. And let's go. So H2S. We know that H stands for hydrogen. So I'm going to drag my hydrogen element over there, or name. And then this little 2, the subscript, tells me that I have 2 hydrogen atoms. I have S for sulfur next, so I'll drag sulfur over here. And that doesn't have any subscripts. And we know that even though we don't see a number there, it's really an invisible 1. Well, if you're doing this at home on your mat, do me a favor and take a picture of this. And if you're doing it in the slideshow, you can just leave it there. Our next chemical formula is NaCl, sodium chloride. So Na is sodium, and it has no subscripts, so we know that that's an invisible 1. Cl is chlorine, and again, it has no subscripts, so we know that that is also an invisible 1. C6H12O6 is number 3, and we talked about this the other day when we were talking about the chemical equation for photosynthesis. C6H12O6 is glucose. That C stands for carbon, and there are 6 of them. The H is hydrogen, and we have a whopping 12. And O is oxygen, and we have another 6 of those. Equation number 4 is H3PO4. H is hydrogen, and we got 3. P is phosphorus. There's no subscript, so I know that that's my invisible 1. And O is oxygen, and we got 4 of those. 3NaOH. Na is sodium. No subscript there. O is oxygen. No subscript there. And H is hydrogen. And again, no subscript there. But I know that these all have invisible 1s, and those invisible 1s are all going to be multiplied by this coefficient 3. So really, I have 3 sodiums, 3 oxygens, and 3 hydrogens. 2, MgSO4. Mg is our good old friend magnesium. S is sulfur, and O is oxygen. So now I need to go back and look at my numbers. I have no subscript for magnesium, so that's an invisible 1, multiplied by my coefficient of 2. 1 times 2 is 2. The same with sulfur, invisible 1 times 2 is 2. And for my oxygen, I have a subscript of 4 times a coefficient of 2, and that gives me 8. Ooh, this is a long one. C8H10N4O2. C is carbon, and there are 8 of them listed. H is hydrogen with 10. N is nitrogen with 4. And O is oxygen with 2. Now that one looked long and complicated, but they were all just straight subscripts, so it wasn't too hard. Ooh, some parentheses. I have NH4 in parentheses 2, SO4. So I have 2 I have N nitrogen. I have H hydrogen, and that hydrogen has a 4. But wait, the N and the H also have a subscript of 2, so I'm going to multiply those by 2. Nitrogen's invisible 1 is going to get multiplied by 2, and that equals 2. Hydrogen's 4 is going to get multiplied by 2, and that really is going to be 8. For sulfur, I have no subscript, so I have an invisible 1 there. And for oxygen, I have 4. Whoops. I'm going to have to steal that one that we hid underneath the hydrogen. C2H4O2, another nice, easy, straightforward one. I have carbon, and it tells me that subscript that there are 2. I have hydrogen, and that has 4. And I have oxygen, and that has 2. Zn parentheses NO3 and parentheses 2. Zn is zinc. It has no subscript, so that's an invisible 1. N is nitrogen. It has no subscript, so that's an invisible 1. O is oxygen, and it has a subscript of 3. But I also have, outside my parentheses, I have another subscript of 2. This 2 gets multiplied times nitrogen and oxygen. So this 1 for nitrogen gets multiplied by 2 and is 2. And the 3 for oxygen gets multiplied by 2 and is 6. NaHCO3. Looks like a long one, but it's really simple. Na is sodium. H is hydrogen. C is carbon. And O is oxygen. Na, H, and C have no subscripts, so they are all the invisible 1. O has a subscript of 3, so there are 3 oxygens. Mg3PO4 So Mg is magnesium, and that has a subscript of 3. P is phosphorus. It has an invisible 1. O is oxygen. It has 4. But then I want to make sure that I take care of this 2 outside my parentheses. So the 1 for phosphorus gets multiplied by 2, and that's 2. And the 4 for oxygen gets multiplied by 2, and that is 8. MgOH. I have magnesium, I have oxygen, and I have hydrogen. And I have no subscripts on any of them, so they all get the invisible 1. But then I come back and I look at my subscript of 2 outside my parentheses. That 2 is going to get multiplied by the oxygen and the hydrogen. 1 times 2 is 2 for oxygen, and 1 times 2 is 2 for hydrogen. And last but not least, CH3,2CO. So I have C is carbon, H is hydrogen. Oh, I have another carbon here, so I'm going to have to keep track of that one. And I have O for oxygen. Let's start with the easy end here. My oxygen has no subscript, so that's going to be an invisible 1. If I look inside my parentheses, C has no subscript, so that's 1 times the 2 outside the parentheses. But I also need to add 1 more here. So I have 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3. For my hydrogen, I have 3 inside the parentheses times 2 outside the parentheses, and that is 6. So that is using the manipulatives to do the breaking down chemical formulas practice. Again, send me pictures, or you can just do it in the slideshow and I will get it from there.